All right, everybody. Welcome back to this week's Griscom stream. It's been a little while. Hope that you've been well. We survived here the crazy weather we've had in Austin. Man, we had a tornado watch and really nasty hail last night, but house as well. Sadly, friends and family up north got hit really, really hard. So love and solidarity to everybody up there. But it's been a while, y'all. It's good to be back. I had a nice little break, very, very much needed, but I miss being able to hang out and chat with y'all. So I'm on the chat now, looking around, here to answer your questions and talk a little bit. We got a great show coming up for y'all tomorrow. We're going to be talking with Nick Bolin, who is a really incredible journalist out of Western Colorado, who wrote a piece in the Drift magazine, a newer magazine, called The Joke's on Them, How the Democrats Lost Rural America. And we talk a little bit about the class structure of rural America, what a lot of liberals and leftists don't really understand about what's been going on there over the past few years, and start to chart a path to try to build a politics that can not only win, but that can start to deliver for people materially, because that is what separates what we try to do here at Left Reckoning and across, I would argue, the broader left, is not just find ways to, get a silver bullet to win one election here or there, but to try to find ways that we can actually build working class power and get results for the people who really, really need it. So very much looking forward to sharing that conversation with all of y'all tomorrow. And later this week, we are going to be joined by Matt McManus for a subscriber-only exclusive. You can get access to that at patreon.com/leftreckoning. And Matt did a really incredible service for most of us by actually slogging through James Lindsay's new, bizarre, frankly, book on Marxism. He's going to be breaking down some of the main arguments in that book, if we can locate them, and also helping us understand, sort of where this figure sort of resides on the contemporary right wing. Because, we've done some stuff on James Lindsay on the show, and, he is a bit of a puzzle because, frankly, he's a bit of a clown. He doesn't really engage with any people who criticize him for not really understanding the things that he's talking about. But there's undoubtedly an appetite for his kind of reactionary views, and I think it's important to locate them. So I'm really looking forward to that. That'll be coming up on Sunday for everybody. But yeah, feel free to jump in the chat with questions. I got it up here on my right side. But before we go too much further, I want to note a couple quick stories. We're going to talk a little bit about Bessemer, which is facing their second union election at the Amazon facility there. That's in Alabama. That caught the hearts and minds of a lot of people post, after the 2020 election. Amazon cheated, used every tactic in the book, but of course they would, including, using the local police department and local authorities to try to intimidate workers. And the NLRB, got in and said, after the fact, of course, that first election was a fraud. And it's a really, really exciting second shot at it. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about that later in the stream. And a few other things. But before we go to questions and to that story, I did want to start everybody with another labor struggle that I think is really important. This is happening in the UK. People might remember we did a long interview with Stella after Sharon Graham was elected the head of Unite, which is one of the larger unions in the United Kingdom, about this new direction, this more militant direction that union was taking in the United Kingdom, particularly on the question of the Labour Party. And there's been a very significant development where we're now seeing the Labour Party shamefully standing against workers. So this has been going on for a little while now, but in Coventry, bin lorry drivers, garbage workers there, went on strike because they weren't getting paid enough. Now, the local authorities there, which are controlled by the Labor Party, basically argued all of this kind of bureaucratic nonsense that, oh, well, because technically where we categorize these workers, we would not be able to raise their wages without raising wages for everybody, which is complete BS because there are other localities nearby where, bin workers have been able to be paid the fair wage that they deserve. This is vital service. I mean, this is some of the most basic stuff that needs to happen in a city, which is being able to deal with the refuse there. And it's been really shameful to see not only the local Labor Party, but the National Labor Party turn their backs on workers. I'll share this video with you all right quick. This is from Unite the Union about a street movement that they've had recently in support of workers who've been on strikes there. Why did that not work? Sorry, y'all. Damn, I hate these things so much sometimes. All right, let me see if I can pull it up on Twitter. I apologize for that. But this. Let me read a quote while I'm pulling up. This tweet here. So as workers have sort of shown up in demanding fair wages here, you've seen this pushback again, not only from the local council in Coventry in the United Kingdom against these workers, the Labour Party, remember, but you've also seen Keir Starmer and his boys basically make it very, very clear that they don't stand for workers anymore. That the Labour Party very clearly wants to be the party that is most cozy with capital, and they're more than willing to throw people under the bus. Keir Starmer said, it seems that Unite is not aware that the Labour Party is under new management, which is a pretty a dig against Jeremy Corbyn. But, if you remember what he's basically saying is that Corbyn would be more sympathetic to people asking for fair wages, for livable wages in their community. I think it's quite the indictment of what Keir Starmer's been doing with the Labour Party. But let's see if we can get this video playing for y'all. It might... You know what? I have to do it this way. I apologize. I'm a little rusty on the system. I need to try to see if I can get the sound to work here. Okay, I think this should be able to play for y'all. If not, is there no sound? Fuck. All right. Well, the video is not playing. I apologize. Restream is not really working out for us these days. Well, effectively, a lot of people have shown up in support. I'll just put this on as B-roll so y'all can see the video, because what truly matters is how many people in the community are supporting these workers while they're on strike. And I'll just put this up as B-roll while I sort of talk through this, because it just like this is something that I find to be extremely shameful. Something really shameful when it comes to what we're seeing from the Labor Party. That they've really turned their back on their base, and they expect to just continue to be funded by unions, to be able to stand for unions, to act like they get the support, even though they've been losing more and more votes from working people across the country. And you see that people are getting fed up. All these people are showing up in support of their essential workers in their community, and saying that it's not all right for the party to say that we're not going to support these workers, that we're not going to pay them a fair wage because of austerity. Right? People note that time and time again in this community, it's the social services that are the first to be cut, and now the local council has spent somewhere near £3 million to fight the legal and correct action of these workers who have gone on strike in Coventry. The council has put £3 million to fighting this for a labor dispute that would probably only cost the city, the locality, somewhere around £300,000. It just is absolutely despicable. This is just another example of why the Labor Party, post Corbyn, has been a party that has ran away from all of their kind of founding morality to be a voice for working people in a hyper class society like the United Kingdom. So I just want to start there. Solidarity with the workers there, solidarity with Sharon Graham. And I think this is the kind of fight that we need to be seeing more. It's taking on, those traditional bases of power who say that they speak for the left, who say that they speak for workers, but every time they stab them in the back. I think it's absolutely despicable what the Labor Party did under Keir Starmer to Corbyn. I think it's absolutely despicable to see what Keir Starmer has been doing to anti-war voices in the country. And I think that, if you're somebody who is not really following what's going on in the United Kingdom, you should really note with respect and admiration the willingness of Unite to take on a more militant approach to these parties, particularly to the Labour Party, a party that is supposed to be standing for all of them. I'm sorry for the sound issue, but people should find I tweeted out. You can find on my Twitter afterwards if you'd like to as well. But yeah, this is a super, and yeah, Brandon says, I see a connection with the Democrats here. Both parties have over time become less pro-labor and more pro-neoliberalism. And in a lot of ways, it's almost worse when it comes to the Labor Party, because, the Labor Party at least has some real roots in the working class movement. Obviously, laborism and what you see in the following decades, was a very, very far cry from what we'd want to see from an actual working class party. But it at least has a traditional base to stand upon. But you've seen it started obviously with Blair, and it's only gotten more and more entrenched, this deep commitment to capital over workers. And I think it's time for working people and working class organizations and unions to say, we will not fund your organization, because that's, how it works there, right? That, a lot of labor's funding used to come from, they've been finding other ways to fund themselves. No doubt that's why they're so willing to throw working people under the bus today. But in that context, there's no reason that unions should feel the need to sort of fall in line behind the Labor Party, especially when it is the Labor Party directly in this moment right here, directly is the force that is preventing these people from having livable wages, right? They're the bosses in this situation. The union should not support them. It's good for the union to challenge them. And I think that this move that we've seen under Sharon Graham is a positive move. We need a hell of a lot more. And you can't expect, one union to be able to do all of that work. But that is a shift in that dynamic that is tragic in what it means for people, but it's positive in the sense that there are alternatives growing there. I'm reading. So I have not followed what's going on in Canada, but I will read Dakota here. Saying, speaking of ostensibly left parties, Canada's federal NDP just agreed to a confidence deal with the minority Liberal government for the next 3 years. What did they get? Progress on dental and pharmacare. And again, I'm no expert on Canada, but from what I've even seen when it comes to the dental, it's been a very disappointing, disappointing and incomplete development there. I mean, we have to find a line, when we're making challenges, to not let these, movements be us sitting outside of politics and not engaging in politics. But yeah, I think it's really important for people to not only realize that, yeah, these traditional organizations are very quick to turn their back on working people, on us, but also start to finding ways to develop and flex our own muscle and power. Like, that's why the Unite example is positive, right? In the sense that instead of it just being, okay, well, a lot of people are saying we're decoupling from the Labor Party, but they're also building their own sites of power, right? Flexing their muscle right there by going on strike means people in the community see what the Labor Party is doing to their neighbors, to their friends and comrades, and to their city, and also where the power really lies. Because at the end of the day, it's not the government that is making sure that sanitation is taken care of in your city. It's working people, and reclaiming that side of power and our ability to withhold our labor when our needs aren't being met, I think is a really important development. Um, so we'll see. It's gonna be a big union episode, frankly, which most left reckonings are. Um, let's see. We like to see this. Our friend Squeaky Deeds Done Soap Clean says, I'm helping organize a union at my job and people with the same occupation at different companies. That's great. I mean, especially being able to organize not just your own shop, but across the board is really important. I mean, having a lot of different, sites of struggle for the bosses is really, really critical as well. All right, well, let's put some questions in the chat, and I'll start answering them. But as we're starting to get started, let's take a quick moment to go to Bessemer. Left Reckoning, really, when we first started this program, Bessemer was the union struggle. There was one of the really important, notable stories that we were covering, right? Because it would be absolutely historic to see a development of a strong union at one of the most fervent anti-union companies, which is Amazon. And also one that would be really, really important to happen in the South, right? Bessemer is a city that is not unused to, hyper exploitation. It's a city with a lot of big companies who have come in there to really make that one of the more industrial capitals of the region. And it's really important to start to find these sites of struggle that we can support, that can start to notch up some wins. So for people who aren't familiar, in Bessemer, Alabama, last year, it started in 2020, and then throughout 2021 there was this big union drive. At every step of the way, Amazon used their influence with local government, the incredible resources that they have, and their ability, because they're the bosses, right? And remember, this is the terminology that you have to remember when you're a socialist, is that we don't have democracy at work. It is a dictatorship. They demand and they set certain expectations for people. And Amazon used all of that kind of authoritarian power on the shop floor to try to stifle the union vote. They also did illegal things like forcing a ballot box to be put under surveillance on the property of the facility there. That was what ended up getting the NLRB involved, saying that the first election was illegal, and they basically threatened workers throughout that process with saying things to the effect of, if this happens, we might have to shut this down, you might lose your job, et cetera, et cetera. All these tactics were clearly illegal at the time. There's a long legal process after, and now finally there's a second vote. The ballots are going to be collected on March 25th. And let me go over to the story here. This is covered in the Real News Network, who people there do incredible work. This is a piece out by Luis Feliz Leon. 1 year after the failed Amazon union drive, workers in Bessemer are voting for a second time. And let me just get some of these facts here because they're interesting. I know some people probably are familiar with the original complaint and fight there, and some people might not be. But we can start. We can start here. So, around 6,100 workers at Amazon's warehouse have now received their ballots. The ballots went out on February 4th. These return ballots are going to be counted starting on March 28th. So the ballots are due back on the 25th. There has been extremely high turnover, and this is why organizing a union fight at these facilities is so difficult. Is because Amazon facilities, they tend to have high turnover rates, which is not surprising. We've talked to our friends at this Machine Kills podcast about the labor conditions that folks face there. Right, they're brutal, and people might work there for a little bit, but more often than not, after a few months, people leave because even if Amazon can sort of say that, like, hey, we pay you a high wage. And give you these kind of benefits, the expectations there are absurd. They overwork people. They treat them like machines. They don't treat them like human beings, and people drop out. This is a tactic that is important not only for Amazon's business model, right, just basically to take people and extract as much value from their labor as possible and then spit them out on the other side. But it's also a tactic that is used to try to prevent the kind of community that is necessary to build a successful union movement, right? Because if people are only working there for a few months before they sort of get chewed out and burnt out by these terrible conditions, it's hard to build that trust with your coworkers to take on one of the most entrenched and powerful corporations in history. Um, this is all from the piece here, but there's some interesting facts um, that Lewis notes here. Nearly 2/3 of residents in Jefferson County, Alabama, which includes Birmingham and Bessemer, say they support the unionization push at Amazon, according to a February survey of around 1,000 residents by the Institute for Policy Studies. Among African Americans, that support is nearly 80%. And let me just read in the words of one of the workers who was interviewed here. This is somebody who has been labeled as a troublemaker by the company for trying to organize and talk to his coworkers about being in a union. The thing that really pushed me over the edge was the fact that we don't have a voice at all. There are people living paycheck to paycheck, working two jobs just to make a living, and every time they voice their concerns, they're never heard. We're used as a means for Amazon to make more money, and that is what made me realize that I have to push as hard as I can for a union. Um, Thomas is not alone. Many other people in that facility have been standing up and trying to convince their fellow workers to vote yes on this union vote. But you have to understand the obstacles that they are facing are immense. Amazon has been operating nonstop, effectively, anti-union propaganda that is mandatory for people to show up at. So 16 hours a day, they are having rooms in the facility where they cycle workers in and out to hear anti-union talking point after anti-union talking point, complete nonsense stuff. And whenever somebody brings it up, um, and starts to challenge them, they'll end those meetings quickly. So this is also from the piece. Let me pull that back up. Um, At captive audience meetings, workers are required to sit and listen to Amazon's highly paid anti-union consultants launch scorched earth speeches, replete with lies, distortions, and fear mongering. Thomas was inoculated against these tactics, and he let the consultants know it. When one consultant tried to paint the union as an outside third party that would get between workers and management, presumably sullying Amazon's world-renowned manager relations, Thomas countered, that's not true. A union is us workers bargaining with management. He said workers in the meeting would then look up what is a union on their phones. They would turn to the consultants and ask, why are you lying to us? Then the union buster would get upset and practically kick us out, Thomas says. He remembers one consultant saying, well, we have another meeting coming up, to which Thomas replied, well, you didn't even finish the PowerPoint, right? So not only is Amazon making, workers sit through these anti-union meetings, whenever people sort of challenge their talking points, they're shutting them down because Amazon has no interest in a fair election happening at the facility. Like, let's not delude ourselves. There is no, Amazon will continue to use every tactic that it can, legal and illegal, to try to stop people from forming a union at this facility because they recognize the power of a union and what that would mean for this company, which has basically has turned into one of the most powerful corporations in the globe because it is fervently anti-union and exploits labor at a world historic rate. On our side, what we have to do is find ways to support these efforts, to show our solidarity, to remind Amazon that the world is watching. I think it's really important. There hasn't been as much coverage of the second bout as there was for the first one. And remember that these processes take a long time. One, just because the organizing work is difficult, and two, because as I noted earlier, Amazon will break the law. And yes, the NLRB will say, "Oh, the election was rigged," or there are issues with it. And we have to hold another. But Amazon is more than happy to kick the can down the road and just do this in perpetuity. They have enough resources to continue to hire anti-union consultants. And, like there's a two-prong part of this fight, right? There's like the on-the-ground support, there's the showing of community and solidarity to people, there's finding ways to get involved if you can. And there's also the political demand that needs to be made, that the federal government needs to step in and prevent these companies from breaking the law. We can't let this shit happen where 9 months later, 6 months later, 4 months later, after the camera crews have left, after the attention has gone away, you know, for the federal government effectively to give these companies a slap on the wrist. There needs to be penalties, severe penalties for denying people their basic democratic right, to be able to express themselves, and to make decisions whether or not they want to be in a union. It's a these things can also take a very, very long time too. And I think that one thing that a lot of people who aren't very familiar with the labor movement don't realize, that union campaigns can happen very, very quickly, as we've seen with the Starbucks unions, but also they can take years and years and years to develop the capacity to overcome a deck that's stacked against us. In the Twitch chat, I can't pronounce that. Savarkin said, "Is it common for unionization to take multiple votes?" Yes. Typically, these things don't always happen one and done. There needs to be pressure on the Biden administration. One of the big arguments for people who said that, instead of voting third party, you should vote Biden, even if you disagree with the Democratic Party, is because of NLRB appointments. Well, for people who made that argument, this is their time to really start demanding that the Biden administration takes that position seriously, right? That they should be putting people into these positions who are willing to use the full authority of that position, of the NLRB, to make sure that companies like Amazon aren't able to just cheat time and time again, because again, it only works in their favor. If Amazon can cheat, and then you have to wait 6 months, another year, for another union election, and you see this complete cycling of workers. So all these people who are quitting because they can't maintain life, being forced to work this much, that works in Amazon's favor, right? Because every single time you're having to effectively start with, if not a blank slate, having to rebuild a lot of those connections. Again, some things that are different this time from the last election is the fact that, COVID lockdown is not happening in the same way that it was in the initial election, which means that you can do more traditional modes of organizing, showing up at people's houses, having face-to-face, in-person meetings with people to convince them why being in a union is in their best interest, right? So hopefully that will move the needle a little bit towards a yes vote on the union. But yeah, these are the kind of things that us as leftists need to be paying attention to, and covering and talking about as much as possible. Again, one, to show solidarity, and two, not to allow companies like Amazon to get away with basically stacking the deck against folks. All right, I'm going to go through the chat and see what y'all are saying about this too. Brandon wants to know, have you been keeping tabs on the Starbucks union efforts? Last I saw, they were up to 147 locations at one stage or another of the process. Yeah, I mean, the Starbucks union move has been one of the most exciting ones that we've seen in a long time, just because there's been so much movement on it, and you're seeing this pop up across the country, and that makes it much more difficult for a company like Starbucks, to be able to just squash, for example, just like one effort. That being said, we've talked about what's happened in Memphis, and this has happened all across the country now. Organizers in Starbucks are being pushed out. Starbucks is using arbitrary rules. If you've ever worked in a service industry job, you know about this. You get this big ass book when you get hired. There are the rules and regulations, for being employed there, and they're filled with a bunch of nonsensical stuff that is never enforced. And Starbucks is using that to terminate people who they believe are the key organizers in these union pushes. So you're seeing people getting fired for things like showing up to work early. Imagine that. People showing up to work early getting fired because they're not supposed to, be at the facility except for when their shift technically begins, right? That's nonsense. People who are, walking behind the counter, to grab their phone or something like that at the end of the day and aren't wearing their apron, right, are being fired for stuff like that. I mean, just like the most nitpicky stuff. That again, as people have noted, these are things that are broken by managers constantly, by Starbucks officials constantly when they show up at those facilities. These are being used, to target and harass union organizing. So again, very, very encouraging. But Starbucks is also playing extremely dirty, as they will. And I think that like it's important. I don't want to be cynical about this. I don't want people to misunderstand this. It's really important to point this out. We just have to accept the fact that until we build up our power, these companies are just going to use every weapon that they have at their disposal to try to break these things. And highlighting it and shaming it and making sure that people understand that if they are supporting the Starbucks corporation, they're supporting union busting, they're supporting harassment of workers, and if you live in a community, and more likely than not at this point you do, that has a active union drive, show up and support. I mean, reminding people that the community has your back is a really, really critical uh, tactic that we have, as we noted earlier with Coventry. Having people showing up and saying to the Labor Party there that we're not going to accept you taking advantage of these critical and vital workers for our community. That's showing that we have the people on our side, right? These are the advantages that we have. Yeah, and as in Twitch chat, as big as our fail son here says, they count on having high turnover. That's at Amazon. And it's interesting. The thing that's interesting about Bessemer, though, is they have extremely high turnover. So I think only 50% of the people who are currently working there were there for the first vote. But Bessemer actually has lower turnover than other facilities, which means that there's a little bit more potential at that facility because it's so crucial. Amazon is not as capable. They certainly will find certain people to harass and fire, but they can't fire everybody because strategically, where the Bessemer location, where it is physically located, is a very, very important hub for distribution across the South, right? So Amazon does not have a lot of other logistics, a lot of other options logistically to sort of reroute distribution through other facilities. So they need to make sure that that their turnover is a little bit lower there, which makes it a very right place for success in the future. Um, we talked with Charmaine Chua, and organizer from Amazonians United. This is probably about 9 months ago, about choke points and understanding the logistics side of capitalism, so that we can locate areas that like Amazon doesn't have the ability, for example, to reroute through other facilities. Bessemer is one of those. So that is an advantage that they have there. um, but no, I mean, they do rely on the high turnover rate. I mean, 50% in a year is absurd and insane for any kind of company. But like, it only shows just how bad turnover is at other Amazon facilities. That it's even notable that 50% turnover at the Bessemer facility is, considered to be good by Amazon, draconian Amazon standards. Um, Awesome Possum says management union at my work settled on a contract that phased out my job title. My fellow workers must bid on a limited supply of jobs. How can I convince coworkers that our union didn't fail us? Well, I don't know the particulars of that. I mean, I think it's also important if you are in a union to be making sure that your national and your represented leaders are doing things that stand up and represent you. I don't know the specifics there, so I can't comment on it. But I mean, one thing that we've noted in this kind of upheaval lately in labor has been the willingness of rank and file members to sort of challenge leadership when they negotiate deals that aren't in the favor of most workers. Um, I think this is about the Starbucks location in Seattle. I saw that they got one. I could be wrong about this, but Kevin says Seattle won 2 votes today. That's huge. This is an interesting tactic from Tommy. He says they talked to a Starbucks organizer and they mentioned keeping spare uniforms to prevent dress code violations. I mean, like, that's the kind of practical strategizing that we have to be able to do in this in the situation to to be able to challenge the draconian measures that the bosses and these corporations are taking to sort of shut down unionization efforts. Tommy also notes Starbucks partners who unionize will be able to bargain for health insurance, better wages, scheduling shift meals. Yeah, I mean, like, and one thing too that's notable about what's happening with Starbucks is they're changing the rules for how their scheduling works and who is considered to be an employee, and they're putting limits on how many hours you can work there. I mean, the whole Starbucks presents themselves as a company that you can sort of work in and have this be like your second job, right? So not necessarily 40 hours, maybe something more in the realm of like 20 to 30 hours, so that you could maybe go to school or have another kind of employment, right? And that's how they've always presented themselves. And this happened in Buffalo, where people who were lead organizers in those situations started to see their hours cut because they weren't meeting the new threshold for the company. Right? They're organizing the company to try to push out union organizers. And I mean, it just goes to show again that they're willing to do almost anything to prevent these moves. Um, Well, all right, y'all. I mean, I'd be happy to take a couple questions. A lot of people are noting stuff about Starbucks, um, but I can take a couple questions before I roll out of here. We have a lot of. I mean, this conversation about rural America that we did with Nick Boland that we'll be premiering tomorrow, I think, was really illuminating. One, because we sort of break down some of the particular fights that we're seeing at across rural America. We break down, and I think most importantly, the class dynamics of rural America, which I think a lot of people, a lot of the hot takes about what's happening in rural America, completely ignores um, the uh, the class dynamics of the class dynamics of rural America. And people forget that there is a very entrenched and powerful land gentry across rural America. People, when you talk about the loss and devastation, the economic devastation that people in rural America have faced over the past few decades, don't forget that there are winners, right? Bill Gates is probably the most famous one, right? That's somebody who has taken advantage of the crisis in rural America to suck up, um, to suck up as much of the of land. People, if you're not familiar, Bill Gates is the largest private owner of farmland in the country now, right? But it doesn't even have to be people as big as Bill Gates. There are smaller local elites who basically, as the economic crisis hit rural America, you started seeing places shut down. You started seeing people have to sell the small land holdings that they had. Somebody bought that. And I think that's also really important to remember that there are landed gentry, local bourgeoisie in rural America that really control a significant amount of the resources, and critically are the people who are most likely to show up and vote. And any kind of real analysis of trying to build class focused strategies for winning rural America really need to be able to wrestle with and recognize that fact that they're in the same way that there is in urban parts of the country, there is a very, very entrenched capitalist class. It shouldn't be that surprising to socialists to wrestle with that, but you see a lot of analysis that is really sloppy on this, that acts as if it's a bunch of rural Americans just like sort of voting against their interests, which is a terminology that I really can't stand. But I'm really looking forward to sharing that with y'all. Dakota wanted to know if I had a good vacation. I very much did. I had some buddies come in. We made some barbecue, went to a few good concerts. South by Southwest is over finally. So that's like a vacation in and of itself. It's always so weird when the city gets, not that there's not a large cohort of them here already, but the weird tech people who show up, you can really feel the difference in the vibe at certain places, particularly in town during South by Southwest. So I had a great vacation. I'm also very happy to be back at a normal life. I missed keeping up with everything and talking with you all. Shami, I haven't seen this directly, but Shami wanted me to note this. Have you seen the news that Belarusian rail workers are not running trains or maintaining lines in order to distract Russian army supplies? This is to show solidarity with Ukrainian rail workers. I had not, I heard a little bit about it, but I haven't, checked into it. This is another really important thing. We talked about this the last Griscom stream before I went live. Before I went on vacation. But yeah, the teachers in Minneapolis, continue to be on strike, and as we've seen, teachers really do hold a strategic advantage in the sense that that's an absolutely critical service, and when they withhold their labor power, the city needs to listen. So nothing but support for the teachers who continue to be on strike there. And I saw that there were some whispering that they might be getting closer to an agreement there, but again, that was just local news stuff. So who knows where they're getting that from? But yeah, I'd love to hear, especially if you're in that area, one, to show up, and two, to let us know how that seems to be going um, in the area. I mean, the Democratic Party has been so disappointing nationally. Again, I'm not in this to get super worked up about saving the Democratic Party, but I am worried about and interested in increasing and expanding working class power. And it is absolutely infuriating to see how weak the National Democratic Party has been on all this labor unrest. I mean, for God's sakes, we're continuing this story in Warrior Met in Alabama as well, right? Where these mine workers have been on strike for what, nearly a year now. Where is the attack ads against all of the Republicans in the state of Alabama for how quickly they turn their back on and sell out local Alabama workers as the natural resources are plundered and money flows to New York City based capitalist firms, right? Where are all of these Alabama politicians there? Particularly the Republican Party, who always love to fashion themselves as the people who are speaking for the working class. They're the real voice of working people in Alabama. Where's their support been for these people? I mean, it's been complete silence. And the fact that the National Democratic Party hasn't taken advantage of that, I mean, I think it shows that they have very little interest in really standing up for working people. I mean, Mike Davis wrote probably one of the best post 2020 election recaps. And one of the most notable things is that it's very clear at this point that the National Democratic Party has made a calculation that they are more interested in trying to win over wealthy Republican districts over to the Democratic Party, and turn their backs on any kind of real sustained working class, building a working class coalition. Um, I understand why the Democratic Party does that, because it's a party of capital. It's not a party of workers. But boy, oh boy, just if you're just being completely neutral, I mean, that's a huge, that's a huge miss for that party. That is frankly amazing. If anything else, just the state party should be really showing up big time for all these people who've been on strike for this prolonged period of time, because that's a very popular issue. I mean, most people can understand that it's not all right for your natural resources to be plundered, and for working people, who are producing there, to be exploited by these really, really nasty, nasty firms. The only reason the Democratic Party, frankly, isn't showing up is because they have the same base of donors as the Republicans, but you know think it's a great opportunity if you want to be an upstart state senator or state representative in Alabama, to start showing up for these people and getting votes, because they have the support of the community, and the political class, both on the Republican and the Democratic Party, there has completely failed them. Shalmi says, could you please invite Vijay Prashad to talk about the wider geopolitical context of Ukraine/Russia? I would be very happy to have Vijay Prashad on. We had him on TMBS. He's somebody who's definitely worth reading and listening to. So, Biometronome says, I like the tax plan Thomas Piketty lays out in Capital and Ideology. Um, You know, Zizek has a very funny line about Piketty being like the ultimate utopian, in the sense that he outlines this incredible amount of inequality in our society, and basically like the solution to this is just the wealth tax, and in a way that actually feeling actually much more like utopian and unreasonable than the socialists claim to redistribute wealth, because there's no way you can maintain this system that we currently have. Um, and and be able to be able to force capital to accept the taxes that they should be paying. We would have to have a very sustained and prolonged working class movement, and at that point, I would hope that we'd be going much further than just like an increase in taxes on the super wealthy. But of course, that's something I support in principle. Um, but I think that it's worthwhile pushing the analysis a bit further. Sparkin at Twitch says the wind farm in the town next to my home village rents the land for the turbines from farmers who still get to farm between and under the turbines. Helps them keep their farms. I mean, that can be helpful. I think that we need to start pushing back um, against these privatization schemes for renewables. Those things need to be taken under public control. People can check out Matt Huber's work. Matt Huber has a book that's going to be coming out, I think, in May. I'm really excited to read it. But one thing that's very frustrating about the way that renewables are sort of set up in the United States, they sort of preclude, state entities from taking over these renewable sectors and really push this kind of neoliberal privatization. Um, Schemes that I think will be really harmful to the renewable movement as it starts to build up steam, because you see across the country that, like, we need, for example, in Texas produces an incredible amount of wind power. I think actually the most in the country. That's an industry that is completely ununionized, and that needs to be unionized, right? And the reason it's not is because there are capital interests in the same way that Starbucks, in the same way that Amazon, in the same way that all these other corporations operate, because it's market logic, are completely hostile to fair wages and unions for their workers, right? And we need to take that challenge very seriously, especially now, as those capacities are developing, as we're starting to build up our renewable sector, to not recreate the same exploitative system that we saw with the other ways that we produce power. So that's something that's worth noting as well. But of course, I mean, there's a lot of ways that we can be utilizing our land. Both with the way that we produce agriculture right now and produce power that would be much more beneficial for folks. Um, Zachary says, "Will you guys talk about Boric's inauguration in Chile? Do you think he can be successful with so much neoliberalism, so much entrenched neoliberalism?" We're like that was such a thrilling election. We covered it a lot during the election. I think we definitely need to do a follow up. I mean, um, this is the thing that's really difficult in the moment that we're at, is that the revolution, these movements, they really start when you take power, right? And maybe to bring this domestic, to sort of make this point more clear to folks, Bernie always made the point that if he got elected, that what was going to be needed was going to be mass movements in the streets, mass organization of working people, to make sure that all these things that he ran on ended up coming into practice, right? Coming into being. And I think that sometimes, because we're so far from power, that we don't really develop that capacity. But in a lot of ways, that building that capacity is even more crucial than just like coming up with an electoral coalition every 4 years that can win at the ballot box. We need to build movements that have both access to the state, the power of the state, the power of the government, and also buy-in from working people, so that whenever you face that, as you were mentioning in the case of Chile, this entrenched neoliberalism, and that's a country, where, like, there's shit that was the Pinochet constitution is one of the, the gold standard of, entrenched power of capital. Um, and understanding to overcome that kind of entrenched force, you have to have the people. So I would love to, to cover what's happening there. And, I'll just say, I wish them the best of luck, and hopefully that capacity, um, is well on its way. But there are some very significant hurdles I think they're going to have to face in the short term, and I hope that that project is successful. But yeah, we would love to do some more on that in the near future. Um, Nicholas Rodriguez says, "Do you, Matt, see yourself starting a democratized media company in the manner which Richard Wolff describes a democratized business?" I mean, Matt and I have been interested in sort of setting this up potentially as a co-op. I mean, functionally, since it's just him and I, right now, like the structures that we have in place sort of work in the sense of power sharing. But like as we grow, that's definitely the intention, and the hope. And I do think that like building stronger left me. I mean, like one of the things, this is like pie in the sky stuff, but one of the things that I know that we really want to do with this project is to really start expanding. And I would really like to start moving a little bit more of this operation, maybe not in the same name, but into some print media that's really focused on the South and the Midwest. So in that sense, I think so. But yeah, I mean, we had initially want to sort of follow through with that, and I think we will. The only tension right now is that with just two people and the way the laws are written, for example, in states like Texas, are actually very hostile um, to setting up any kind of operation in that way. That doesn't mean that we're not going to pursue it. Just is like we haven't pursued it immediately just because it's the two of us. But I do think that that's an important thing to be able to do. A lot of people mentioning Piketty. I mean, like, look, I think Piketty has done a hell of a lot of work, and I'm not necessarily anti-Piketty, but yeah, I think that you see the kind of limitations of a certain kind of analysis until you start to take, um, you know, the power of capital seriously. It will be really hard, to break inequality in the society, right? Because the inequality in the society that we have right now is not because we have like ignorant leaders. It's because the people who get into power in America and across Western Europe, they see their role not necessarily as directly in the sense that they're getting a phone call, though that happens from time to time, from major industry leaders. Um, they see their role to maintain environment that is extremely friendly to capital, and because capital tends to accumulate, you want to protect the fortunes and the interests of the very, very powerful. Um, in your society, which is why I think like until you really start considering yourself a social, somebody who really wants to upend, the system, there's very, very limited, um, limited avenues, I think, for a kind of like reformist version of like a nice squishy, what do they call it, progressive capitalism, which is a complete misnomer. Um, if we nationalize our power grid, would it be a lot easier to go green? Seems like maybe. I think that that's the one of the number one goals that we should be pursuing in the climate movement. I think I talked about it 2 weeks ago that I think one thing that's really worrying is that there is such a influx of a kind of like um, neoliberal logic in a lot of like green technology right now that really is going to create hurdles, one, to actual like implementation, right? Because if you have just like a bunch of competing firms, that's not necessarily going to be as good at producing the mass amounts of power that we need as a society. And two, it creates these perverse incentives. We talk a lot about these like privatized power companies. Entergy's one, and people, if you're in New Orleans, I know New Orleans DSA is working right now to try to block the campaign donations from Entergy, which is a really, really nasty power company there. Um, we need to take these things under democratic control, and we need large systems. This kind of idea that we're just going to build up really, really small, bespoke, boutique energy systems, small grids, is will be an absolute disaster, both on the actual level of, like, one, on the actual level of producing the amount of power that we need, and two, what you see all the time in this damn country, when you give rich people the opportunity to opt out, they will. And what does that mean? They leave the rest of us to, to suffer. And like Texas, I'm very, very frightened when you're seeing the kind of response to the winter storm, that killed people. Right? People were without power. I mean, it was absolutely devastating. And there hasn't been enough of a push, in my opinion, to really start democratizing the way we produce energy, and to demand that this is something that is a democratic right, something that this kind of like super small local opt-in shit will completely upend. And we need to get much more serious about what the next system looks like, what the next kind of grid looks like, and not just thinking that any kind of alternative is good in and of itself. Because there's no doubt about it that there is going to be much more investment into some form of renewable. But the question is, will it be renewable energy for the masses, for the people, or be renewable energy for wealthy people who decide that they want to opt in? Right? The whole idea, like, you're gonna you're seeing this, like, we'll just have, if you're rich, you can get a power bank on your house, so you'll never have to deal with a grid failure again. Well, what does that mean for the rest of us? What does that mean for me? Hell, what does it mean for all of my neighbors here? Right? It means that we will be living on a much less sophisticated grid, a much less sophisticated energy system. Well, the rich people don't have to worry about it. And you think they're going to want to subsidize working people to power their homes? They'll say, no, I've paid for my own electricity. I want to get reimbursed through that, through tax credits, etc. Right? And that is the way that a lot of, like, the liberal model for dealing with climate change is going, and it's just completely inefficient. So yeah, I think nationalization. I think pursuing projects. We have examples in our history of mass movements that brought power to the society. The TVA is one of them, and we need to be pursuing more models like that, rather than these kind of really wonky technical tax schemes for the few. So yeah, I think nationalization and democratization, those are the key words there when it comes to energy. And as Jared says here, make wind energy a public utility. I 100% agree. I mean, it's like, you could see, because again, like, also look at the context and the areas where this is happening, right? Texas, it's a very, very privatized system. They take advantage of their workers. It doesn't have to be that way, but market logic necessitates, that they create models where, the workers are getting underpaid, workers are working dangerous jobs, and they're trying to prevent any kind of, serious workers protections in the wind sector here in Texas. And we need to be fighting that. It's like, we don't need to be fighting wind power, but we need to be fighting against wind capitalists, who are very, very willing to see their workers suffer, who are who don't really have the incentive, um, you know, to produce the kind of model that we want to see for working people in this country, which is a safe, reliable, green grid that provides union jobs for people, that allows people to live a decent life on those salaries. And like, it's unfortunate that it's the way that it is right now. And it's like, we have to fight on two fronts. We have to fight against the nasty oil people who are trying to lay dissent and doubt about the possibility of any kind of decoupling from a fossil fuel economy. And we also have to prevent the same kind of dynamics that developed in the fossil fuel economy from coming into the green economy. That's why we support things like the Green New Deal. And it sucks right now, when we don't have a national candidate like Bernie Sanders to really hold that flag for us. So then it means that responsibility falls on all of us. All right, I'm coming down to catch up with the chat, y'all. Appreciate. Thank you, Zachary. I mean, it's just an idea I've been kicking around. I mean, the big thing is, like, I want to be able to pay people, so I wouldn't want to start doing it until we found a way to get some seed funding, essentially, to maybe raise some money so that we could pay reporters. But there's so many good reporters and writers in the South who I just have seen don't get the same attention and don't have the same access to resources, and just because of geography, don't know people. And I think finding a home for them is something that we could definitely do. And I would be happy to do that work. I don't have the answers necessarily how to do that immediately, but I think um, that'd be something uh, um, worthwhile. Sorry, Bessner's not coming out. We're talking about Bessemer, Alabama, but we love Danny Besner. Would love to have him on the show again sometime soon. All right. Um, I love trains. I don't know much about magnetic trains. I might have to run in a second. Um, well, y'all need to ask Matt to do it. I've been trying to get. I know he did a Twitch stream last Saturday. I'd love to see there be more Lex streams. Um, show him that y'all want to show up for it, and I'm sure he will. Um, I'm sure he would be happy to do it. And I'm running out of steam a little bit, but I mean, I think Zachary said, "Do you think we are at the end of history?" And I mean, I think everything we've seen over the past 10 years has sort of shown that the the reports of the demise of history and of capitalism have been greatly exaggerated, right? I mean, come on, we're certainly living in history right now. We're seeing a complete maniac and Putin invading a neighboring country, and um, this kind of old model really struggling with how it wants to find itself in a very new world. I mean, all of that kind of triumphant end of history stuff, I think, has been very much um, you know repudiated. I mean, for people who aren't familiar, Francis Fukuyama wrote a very famous book called The End of History, which essentially argued after the end of the Cold War, that liberal capitalism had won out, and and that we had there still would be things that would be happening, but these kind of systemic crises, these grand ideological processes, um, were coming to a halt. And notably, Fukuyama isn't even a Fukuyamian anymore. I mean, he's come out and basically said that thesis has been proved incorrect. Where we're in now, I think, is an interesting question, because you saw under Trump, and this kind of right wing resurgence across the industrialized capitalist countries. Um, that there was, I think more people were recognizing that no, like all these questions that some people thought had been settled certainly weren't. Um, but now I think that question gets interesting, because you see, you saw this, the victory of Biden, and it seemed that maybe, neoliberalism, we were sort of reverting back to that old system. And I think what's notable about neoliberalism sort of revival is how limp it is. Like, people really believed, that we had gotten, like, the Blairs and the Clintons, that we had sort of, they had created a new synthesis of like how government should function and work. And I don't think people in power um, have that same kind of confidence anymore, of being able, that they are the ones who have like the answers to these questions. I think that the kind of like neoliberal like vanguard, who very much runs all these society. I mean, I think it's really notable too to note that, like, so Trump runs on a very, very different rhetoric, but as a government, despite some of the crueler aspects of Trump's government, it was just like autopilot Republican um, government, right? And I think that shows that the state itself has really shown its ability to run itself. But the people in power, the minds of the system today, certainly, I don't think have any real kind of reckoning with how they will be able to handle um, and sort of suppress the fundamental contradictions of the system that we're living in. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an opening for the left. I mean, I'd hope it would be. But like, have we developed the forces to be able to challenge that model? I mean, really, what's frightening about the system right now is it does feel like it is sort of operating on an autopilot way, despite all of these crises that we're seeing around us. Um, yeah, Bill Clinton played the saxophone, and history was canceled after that. No, I did not see Tim Pool in real life. I'll be honest. I would frankly have. I don't follow these guys that much, so I would have a hard time really picking them out in public if I were to see him. Um, New game plus history. There you go. That's where we're at, and that means shit's going to get a lot harder, right? Um, well, I'd love to sit around and chat, but I think I should run. We're going to be back tomorrow with this conversation with Nick Bolin. I mean, really, if you want to talk, for these conversations about end of history and things like that, I think it actually will pair very nicely with the conversation that we have with Nick about, how these things, there's the simple, quick answer for what we need to do, which is build, working class politics and power in this country. And then there's the second level, which is, okay, well, this is a very complex and complicated society, and how do we actually do that? So I hope y'all join us for that. We have a few more things in the main show tomorrow. Don't forget, we have a phone number which you can call and leave us a voicemail. That's up on our Patreon. When you sign up, you'll get that number. We post it there regularly too. So please leave us a voicemail. Matt and I will answer those in the post game. And then this Sunday, our conversation with Matt McManus on James Lindsay's really atrocious book, Critiquing Marxism. I can't wait for everybody to see that. You can get access to all of that at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Stay safe, take care, and I'll see all of y'all soon.